this is your forward.
Yep.
Do you ever need to go back? Just that.
All right.
Like,
Great, thanks. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for making the time to hear about one of the things that I am personally most grateful for in life. This might sound a bit weird when you're talking about what is effectively a giant Ethernet switch, but this is much more than that to me and to our community. The SIX started out quite some time ago, 1997, I suppose it were, when it became apparent at one of these NANOG conventions that there was a better way, that there was an opportunity to cut 111 millisecond round trip time between two companies that were actually located on the same floor of our local carrier hotel, and to do something better. And so you can see here, this is one of the very earliest iterations of the exchange. The SIX, by the way, is no longer based on this platform, thankfully. It's been around for 20 years now. So we believe this is one of the largest non-monthly recurring charge internet exchange points on the planet. We literally have achieved what I would consider to be supercritical mass from a peering standpoint, with a very significant number and quality of peers. And in this case, we're moving almost a terabit per second, and I think we'll be there within the next year or two at current growth rates. The thing that's really impressive about this, though, is that we do this with a single paid engineer and an army of incredibly talented engineers who donate everything from time, labor, on-call duty, and a million other things that I will share with you. So this started out, again, in 1997 with a simple Ethernet hub. There was no switch at that point in time. And what we found was that there was a lot more interest in this than anybody anticipated. So there wasn't really a master plan to create an internet exchange point, and there certainly wasn't an architecture roadmap for it. What we found was that hardware was actually much easier to come by than we would have expected. So this is back when Ethernet switches were quite expensive, when ISPs were quite poor. I was one of them. I worked with Oz.net, which was one of the first dial-up and DSL ISPs in the Seattle area. And this equipment was hard to come by, and yet we found, much to my great surprise, that companies, participants were willing to contribute switching equipment, optics, labor, what have you, because they were getting so much value out of it almost from day one. And so over time, we started experimenting with 10 gig ports, with 40 gig ports, and today, I think we're seeing, in the last 2 years, massive growth in 100 gig interest, and we're building up to what Chris, our senior engineer who runs the exchange day to day, calls the fantasy 400 gig switch, because we actually think there will be market demand for that in the not too distant future here. So the SIX has evolved. It started out in the beginning with a centralized core switching fabric, or decentralized, I should say. There were originally two switches, and then it was consolidated into one. And then over time, it decentralized naturally as we began to add extensions and other core switches that are outside of the Westin building. For those unfamiliar, the Westin building is downtown Seattle, and it's the largest carrier hotel, I think, north of the Bay Area. So within the building, we have two Arista switches that serve as the primary core that are distributed across 2 floors. We also have extension components of the core switching fabric at distant facilities that house large portions of the local internet infrastructure, those being Como Plaza, which is down the road from the Westin building by about half a mile or so, and say the Intergate, which is substantially further away, down south, down closer to the airport, where there are very large data centers that are used by the companies that we all know and love for all the things that they do. One of the more interesting and controversial aspects of the SIX has been our model of allowing layer 2 extensions both within and outside the building, or the buildings plural. And as you can see, some of these actually extend outside of the metro Seattle area and into fairly distant locations. Our traffic growth mirrors what you would all expect to see with the internet. As I mentioned, at peak now, we're right up about 750 gigabits per second of sustained traffic across the fabric. And finance-wise, we've been incredibly blessed. I would say that we did a few things right here. One of them is that we have always operated as lean and efficiently with minimal overhead and fluff as possible. The other thing we've been really good at is charging port fees that are reasonable and appropriate, not excessive, but which allow us to accumulate enough cash and reserve to make the necessary infrastructure upgrades as they come without having to sweat what to do about money. So you can see there was a ramp up in the 2008 to 2011 period, an expenditure, and then again, a nice ramp up. I think right now the exchange has in excess of $500,000 in cash reserves, which we view as our future proofing for the next round of switching equipment upgrades. Membership also has been a really impressive growth area. As you can see, back in the beginning, there were 10-ish peers. Today, I think we're at almost 275 different organizations. These range in size and scope from mom and pop ISPs all the way up to the largest content producers and delivery networks and cloud computing organizations on the planet, and everything in between. So we've really got an incredible diversity of membership, carriers, ISPs, other exchange points who actually have extended our switching fabric into their exchanges and beyond. Probably the smartest thing that we did, and I'm gonna really pat on the back the original leadership of the organization, is that we decided radical transparency was really the right way to go. We are meticulous, and I would say Chris Caputo in particular is meticulous about making sure that all the decision making, even the mundane stuff, even approving new memberships, even approving slight rule changes, everything we do is documented, it's organized, it's publicly available, you don't need a password to go look at it, and we share this not just because we think it's the right thing to do, but because we want to contribute these ideas and best practices back to the Internet Exchange Point community, and indeed others have drawn extensively from our body of work around good Internet exchange governance to help build and develop other exchange points. So we're particularly proud of and hope to evangelize this idea that community exchange points do not need to be a black box, they don't need to have secret committees, they need to be just the opposite. So let's talk about extensions. These are a really interesting topic because, again, this wasn't really something we thought about or planned out. This is just something that happened organically in the early days of the exchange. Again, this was originally within the walls of the Weston building, which is 34 stories. There was an implicit assumption that's always been with us that we want to move packets as inexpensively and reliably and simply as possible. We don't want to get complicated. We don't want to adopt bleeding edge protocols. We want to make this as easy and cheap and painless for peers, perhaps at the expense of reliability and SLAs, as we possibly can. So again, there wasn't really a lot of debate or planning around this. It just kind of happened. Companies wanted to extend the fabric into their own colo facilities, their own suites. Perhaps they wanted to do that for cost reasons because it was prohibitively expensive to run large numbers of fibers through the floors. And for some of them, it was a marketing thing, right? So they wanted to be able to promote this as one of the benefits of using their facilities. So I think the good news is that it has been very, very stable, very reliable. It's scaled well. The bad news is that anytime you have a very large layer 2 blast radius, there's always the risk that something will go horribly wrong and that someone will fail to upgrade their inter-switch link capacity in an appropriate time frame to avoid link congestion. So we have definitely seen cases where some of the downstream extensions have not kept pace with traffic growth, and that has resulted in the SIX having to apply pressure as appropriate to get them to do that. Another interesting thing, the PAX Seattle, which is now the Equinix Colo and Exchange Fabric, was one of our very first extensions in the early days. And I think there was a mutually kind of symbiotic relationship where they were bringing in very large companies and more established operators. The SIX at the time, this is very early, was primarily catering to the community. And I think some of those early extensions with some of the other exchanges in the metro area really led to the snowball effect that we saw and got the peer count to where it is today. This was a little more controversial. This came later on, and the question was, well, if we can do it within the building, why can't we do it outside of the building, right? And I think, the good news is this is not entirely bad. It's worked really well. Fisher Plaza was the first big use case. We had donated dark fiber. It was a very short haul. The route where the fiber runs is very heavily controlled because everybody's digging it up and refilling it, so it's under pretty good supervision. And we also made sure that all of these participants understood that we were going to protect the core of the exchange at all costs. So if that meant abruptly pulling the plug, cutting somebody off, or otherwise sanctioning a participant that is malfunctioning or behaving badly, that we reserve the right to do that with zero notice as needed. It's almost unheard of that that actually happens in practice, but we want people to understand this is a different set of rules, right? We're not making SLAs, we're not making promises, but we are committed to keeping as much of the exchange as healthy as we can, all the time, and sometimes that means having to make difficult decisions under the gun. At this point, as I mentioned, we have expanded this well beyond the walls of the Westin and the downtown Seattle core, all the way to the entire greater metro Seattle Bellevue area, and I believe that trend will continue, especially as we consider the consequences of catastrophic failure at the Westin building to the regional infrastructure. I think there's a lot of concern about the need for decentralized core switching for the exchange. So one of the questions that we get a lot is, how do you guys do this, right? How do you, with only one part-time paid engineer and some part-time volunteers, how do you actually run an exchange of this size, scale, and complexity? Because with this many peers, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of issues, there's debugging, there's vendor interaction. And I think that the answer is much easier than you think, right? We basically have the paid engineer, Chris, as the primary responder, and we have a whole team of people that have been in the industry probably for 2 decades or more, and who have all worked together in different capacities over the years, who are all backups. We all have physical access and logical access to the infrastructure, and I think we've had almost no incidents that I can think of where our response time has been anything other than absolutely instantaneous. And a lot of that has to do with the people, candidly, more than the systems or infrastructure. These are all people that we know to be highly reliable, highly responsive, competent, credible, people that aren't just frontline NOC, but they're engineers who can get in there and actually work with peers and participants and vendors as needed. But honestly, we've had an incredibly good run with, and I'll knock on whatever material that is there, with almost no major service incidents that are not proving to be a hardware issue or software issue or something like that. But we do some good hygiene and maintenance. And in particular, we've done work with ARPSponge, which is one of the assets we've leveraged from M6 that helps deal with spurious broadcast traffic. And we use a lot of other tools that help us along the way to automate and streamline as much of this as possible. But again, I think that the real answer here is that we have the right team of people who are invested and committed enough that we haven't found the need to spend a lot more money on a lot more redundancy or SLAs around engineering and operations response. In the case of physical infrastructure, as you guys know, this stuff is very expensive. Keeping large numbers of 100 gig line cards laying around for a scenario that we hope never happens typically isn't very cost effective. So in some cases, we have next business day with spare on site. In some case, we use vendor provided 4-hour spare in the air for critical line cards and infrastructure. And again, we do reserve the right to cut anybody off if needed for any reason at any time. So what are the things that we really learned here, okay? And I think, the biggest takeaway, looking back on this whole 20-year adventure, and it really has been an adventure over the years, is this is what happens when need meets luck and dedication. The need was present. This was the early era of ISPs, internet stuff. Circuits were very expensive and hard to come by. Equipment was very expensive. So there was definitely a need. There was this forum, this community that led to some of those early conversations and discussions and efforts at building a community exchange. And there's been dedication. I haven't personally been as heavily involved the last few years as I was 15 plus years ago. But I lurk on the mailing list as an advisor, and I am blown away by just how much time and headspace really amazing people who are really busy are willing to contribute to this effort. You would think that these folks would either not care or would want to be compensated or would, lose interest, and that's just not been the case. We have had an incredibly devoted, dedicated, loyal group of people that have made this happen. Beyond that, I think there's been a few key lessons that we've learned, and when we were asked to share kind of the 20-year update on the 6, these are the things that we came together and agreed were the highlights. Number 1, keep it simple, stupid. We have time and time again been tempted for all sorts of reasons to try complicated or cutting edge or different topologies and technologies. And I think that the conclusion we keep coming back to is, you know what, we don't need to be the trailblazers. We need to do this as inexpensively and reliably as we can while keeping overhead low and showing our membership that that's what we know how to do and that we're good at it. I think the combination of volunteers, who again, I think have been incredibly dedicated with and generous with their time and expertise and opinions, but also having one dedicated engineer who is accountable, and I would honestly say, without exaggeration, probably the best operations person I've ever been able to witness work in a real world setting. It's a winning combination. He works so hard to make sure that this is all transparent and it's all open, and I really do appreciate all Chris does for our exchange, and I know that the rest of our community feels the same way. We're really blessed to have the right mix of paid staff and volunteer talent. Community presence and evangelism, we haven't done nearly enough, but some might say it's been clearly adequate in terms of outreach. We haven't done any marketing, we haven't done any direct customer engagement or peer engagement. We haven't had to go shop around trying to convince people to join us. We've been really lucky in the sense that the community has kind of evangelized itself, and word has spread, again, through forums like this. So we really have not spent a lot of time, headspace, or money trying to drive adoption. The adoption has really been the driver for more interesting matters like engineering and operations at scale. One of the things I think we really, really got right was recognizing that because we have such little overhead month to month, that we can get away with charging for the physical ports and the optics, but we don't really need the revenue stream to support operations by charging a monthly recurring fee. This is very, very unusual, as you probably know, in the exchange space, and we love it. We really do like the idea that you can come, you can actually get the low-end ports for free or almost free, and if you get to even up to 100 gig, the port cost relative to the savings and value and performance you get out of it, it's a no-brainer for almost any organization that has a presence in this area. It really is a remarkably good value, and yet we've set them high enough that we've been able to accumulate enough money to make sure that the exchange has continuity and has the resourcing required to move to the next level of switching infrastructure over time. Again, transparency in all we do, I think, is one of our strongest suits, and I really do believe that has become part of the 6 DNA and something that when other exchanges have talked to us about what we would recommend they do to get off the ground and to build community, we really stress that point. Autonomy and political distractions. So one of the things that Keep It Simple Stupid has forced us to do is not get sucked into things that aren't relevant to moving packets. There's always the temptation to get involved in debates or discussions or community efforts, and I actually at one point was advocating that we do this to get beyond just moving packets, to do more than just that. And I think that the conclusion we've come back to time and time again is getting mired into somebody else's political debate or concerns is not really value add. It's just a distraction and it's just negativity. So why don't we stay focused on what we're really good at and do more of it? And we have done that. Again, the distributed switching fabric, I think that there's a lot of debate about the sanity of layer 2 broadcast domains, that big, but yet it's been done elsewhere, it's being done here, and I would say that it's much more stable and reliable than I might have guessed it would have been after 20 years of operations. And then finally, I think the other big lesson learned here is with vendor engineering support and mitigation and risk. We've tried different equipment vendors over the years. Currently, the primary vendor, I think, for the core of it is Arista, but there's some others involved. And I think we've encountered everything. We've had hardware failures, we've found new bugs in operating systems, we've found feature deficiencies in switching operating systems that seem minor but end up being major. You learn a lot of things when you're doing public internet exchange point at this scale because there just aren't that many of them in the world, and the traffic profiles and workloads and criticality of those workloads are much higher than usual. So is it all just luck? Is it just that we were the right people in the right place at the right time? I think that obviously was a lot of it. There was the need, there was the talent pool, there was the presence of this organization and the mentorship from people here that helped kind of get the exchange off the ground, but there was a lot more than that. We've been really, really, really lucky with donors. We've had equipment, we've had money donated, we've had immense amounts of time and volunteer effort and expertise, and perhaps even more valuable than that, we have people's opinions. We have really, really amazing, smart people that lurk on this mailing list and are willing to share their time and headspace with an organization that candidly doesn't pay them anything and can't afford to or couldn't afford to even if it wanted to, and yet they are so willing to engage in debate and thoughtful discussion around all sorts of issues that relate to the exchange and beyond. And that to me has probably been personally the most interesting and rewarding part of it. It is amazing to me how much time people will put into this, and for all the right reasons. No recognition, no fame and fortune, just interesting engineering and operations and community development. Real estate's been a big factor as well. We've been very, very lucky with contributions of proper real estate within the Weston Building and beyond from property owners. I think that actually is more of an issue at other exchanges than it's been for us. The Weston Building in particular downtown has gone to great lengths to accommodate the growth of the exchange over the years and its various facilities requirements relating to environmental controls, power systems, et cetera. And I think the other big contribution that we've drawn from here, and this is by no means something that should be understated, is the body of community intellectual property. So there is an immense volume of work that's been done by other exchanges and other entities around the world. Without this work, we could not do what we do today. And some of the ones that were named specifically as significant, BIRD, which is Internet Routing Daemon for Linux, ARPSponge, which again AMP6 uses to keep spurious layer 2 broadcast traffic in check, IRR and REDB for routing registries, BGPQ3 for filtering automation, and then again know-how. So people like Bill Woodcock and the AMP6 and NANOG communities and so many more over the years have really gone to great lengths to support us and encourage us and maybe give us a little course correction when we've gotten an idea that they've seen fail elsewhere. So that really is all I had to say. Again, I feel incredibly grateful and tremendous gratitude for having had the opportunity to watch the development of the 6 for 20 years. And I'd like to encourage anybody with any questions or comments or concerns about the 6 to email info@seattleix.net or myself personally. We also have 8 minutes, it looks like, for Q&A. So if we have any questions or comments about the 6 itself, would be happy to field them as best I can or punt to other 6 people if need be. Yep.
Hi, I'm Patrick. So you have a successful growing exchange that hasn't fully monetized everything it is. When are you IPOing and can I get friends and family?
When are we IPOing? When will you get friends and family? I think the short answer is the exchange probably will never change from its current governance model, ownership, membership-driven ownership model, operational model. It'll continue to evolve and mature, but I think that there's a very strong desire among the people that have been involved and remain involved to preserve the aspects of it that are working and not get tempted by the possibility of making money or scaling it or adding more employees or outreach efforts or otherwise trying to monetize what is indubitably, a very valuable asset, right? There's no question that there are a lot of companies that would want to pay a tremendous amount of money to own and operate this specific thing. And in fact, there have been some casual, let's say, attempts early on at not nationalizing it, but kind of assuming control or getting involved for the wrong reasons. But again, the team that we have is very cognizant of that. We all work in the industry. None of us want to see this become a commercial exchange or a marketing vehicle for equipment manufacturers. So I think the IPO probably not going to happen. I'm sorry. I think one other interesting thing that came up along the way that we didn't mention earlier was the debate about security and in particular, can you trust your switching equipment vendors? And if so, at which layers do you trust them, right? So there was a lot of debate about certain vendors may be in bed with other governments and other vendors may be in bed with different governments. Should we buy from those vendors or should we accept donations from those vendors? And I think that debate was a really interesting one to watch because it happened right as the Snowden revelations came out. And there was a picture in there that you guys probably remember of some NSA people tampering with routers and resealing them with Cisco tape at some warehouse or facility. And I think the conclusion that we came to is this is not our problem. Our job is to move the packets. We're not responsible for encrypting them, securing them. We don't pretend that we know where all the malware and implants and backdoors and the switching fabric are because no one really does. We don't know how many unknown third parties may or may not have compromised any of it. We leave that to the membership and the users to do transport layer encryption. We do not presume to know all of the code that is running in every microcontroller and ASIC and whatever that's in our switching equipment. So, any other questions?
We have 2 questions stage left.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Nathan Schrank, St. Louis Regional Internet Exchange. Are you aware of anybody who has ever tried to quantify the benefit that the existence of 6 in the Weston building provides to the owners of that building? You mentioned that they've been generous with space, power, et cetera, to you, but I think that the 6 existing there probably also has greatly benefited them. And I'm just wondering if anybody's ever tried to quantify that.
I bet they have. I don't know what number they put on it, but I'm sure that when they look at the value of their asset, which is, it was an office building. It was the Westin Hotel chain's original headquarters, I think before Starwood bought them. It was originally, copper-based and early fiber-based CLEX and ILEX and long-distance carriers and microwave crap on the roof. And now it's, probably per square foot, the most valuable real estate north of the Bay Area. I'm sure that they know what that has contributed to that ecosystem. I'm sure if I were them, I would argue that momentum had already built, and the reason that the 6 was, formed there was because that momentum was there, right? The ISPs were there because the CLEX were there. The CLEX were there because the long haul stuff was there. And again, this was like early days. But indubitably, the building, the value of that building, is much higher than it would have been, I think, if it didn't have that, in addition to its lower layer physical meet me room facilities that are obviously very popular as well. Yes?
Hi, Dan Rohan with Kentic. My question is, did you guys do anything besides MAC address limiting to kind of protect against your layer 2 domain expansion as you built on these extensions?
Good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but I think the answer is we try very hard to maintain. Wait, here we go. We have the right person to answer that question coming right here.
Yeah, for extensions we do, I'm Chris Caputo, Seattle Internet Exchange. For extensions we do MAC ACLs, static MAC ACLs, and we take advantage of Arista's storm control feature, which we have cranked all the way down to as low as you can set it. And also we do max MAC count setting, and that's it.
I think those are best practices that we've shared and have been given by other community IXs around the world. So again, a lot of this is learning as we go and sharing that information with the community and learning from what other, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller exchanges have done successfully. So,
Can I do a follow-up?
Sure,
We
yeah.
have time. So have you guys ever considered what's the point at which a large layer 2 exchange should maybe become a layer 3 network? Is that something you wrestle with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been debating that for 20 years, right? We've been talking about, is this the right model? Is it the right architecture? Is it the right approach? What would a different architecture look like? What are the pros and cons? VXLAN has been tossed about. And the conclusion, the gravity or the sort of guiding principle that we've always followed is keep it simple, stupid, right? We keep it as dead simple from a technology standpoint, an operating standpoint, a governance standpoint as we possibly can. And if the need for that sort of thing becomes apparent because there are service incidents or we're aware of scalability limitations that the vendors say, hey, there's no way we're going to get beyond this, we're going to have to adapt, right? This is a ongoing, evolving machine. It's not a static switch that sits in a corner and just runs all day long. But we've managed to scale it way beyond, like the rest of the internet, way beyond what I think any of us believed would have been possible given the technologies that existed 20 years ago. So it's amazing how far, if you think about it, how far IP and Ethernet have come over the years. 3/4 of a terabit per second is unfathomable to me. But maybe I'm just getting old, so I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. And again, seattleix.net website, all sorts of interesting stuff there. And we thank all of you for your time and attention this morning. And have a great day.
All right, Jared, congratulations on 20 years, and thank you for coming here to tell us about the experience. All right, everyone, I hope you're ready for lunch. Lunch will be downstairs. If you received an invitation to the newcomers' lunch, that'll be an Evergreen A to D. Otherwise, Evergreen E to I, just to the side of it, will be for the rest of the population for our welcome lunch. Surveys for today's program are up on the website if you want to provide your input, and we'll see you back here after lunch. Thank you.